Welcome to our sixth Ketchup Session. It's really a pleasure to have you all here today join us for this occasion. I'm Marie Martre, Director of Caddis Collections. And maybe to tell you a little bit more about this series, Ketchup Session is a monthly series of events which we conceived to celebrate our 20th anniversary this year. It aims at fostering conversations between artists from the Caddis collection who are geographically remote but share strong interests and common grounds in their practice. I'm very happy today to welcome Inti Guerrero, who will be hosting Adriana Bustos and Cian Dayrit, two amazing artists who are calling respectively from Buenos Aires and Manila. Inti is calling from Hong Kong and is the artistic director of Bellas Artes Project in Manila, tutor of the curatorial studies program at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Ghent, and also a longtime and dear collaborator of and advisors of Caddis. Before we begin, just wanted to share also a few practical notes. We will post the artist bios in the comments and on the website to keep the event to an hour. And the conversation is also captioned in English. We'll be monitoring the chat if you have any question along the way, but also for the Q&A at the end. And without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome Inti. Thanks, Inti, for joining us.
Thank you, Marie, for the invitation. It's really quite a dream to have the possibility of having both Adriana and Cian speaking of their work together, hopefully at some point closer geographically, but for now we are in different time zones and very happy to make this happen. It's the work of each of the artists, it's unique, but there is some kind of conversation and dialogue that is present, and I hope that people will get a chance to understand the different, not only ways of working, but also context in which they operate, or that they're interested in, that have a familiarity because of historical processes or because the way in which societies are structured and how both of these artists are looking at them in a transhistorically way. Yeah. We with Caddis wanted to create this dialogue also, given that their notions of counter mapping or different ways of understanding cartography are a proposal to understand artwork beyond an object. When one approaches the work of both Cian and Adriana, or at least that's my first experience with both of them, is that your behavior as a spectator is beyond that relationship between art and object, because you're giving this information of a map. So you have to decipher, you have to read the way that you absorb the work is, yeah, beyond that aesthetic and relationship between subject and the art object. And so when literally, I think one has to force or is forced by the work to be even in an exhibition space a little bit more intimate, or have more time to read the work, you know? And obviously when one starts to read and decipher each of their pieces, you start to question the history that is being deconstructed in each of their pieces, and also the general nature of mapping and the general nature of cartography and infography. There's a lot of, in many of their works, it's not only about, let's say, mapping in a more classical cartographic way, but there's also a lot of playful ways of understanding infography, and how can that be inverted in, given that infography, like cartography, have been tools of ordering the world and controlling people and structures, and it's been used and employed in that way historically. So we're gonna start with Adriana. First, she's going to give a little bit of 8-minute presentation of her practice. The same for Cian after her. I met Adriana when she did beautiful work for a major biennial in Medellin, which, yeah, unpacked the history of the first lady of Colombia in the middle of the 20th century. And it was so rich. I was completely convinced, like, how come I don't know this Colombian artist? Like, who is this? And I was like, no, it's this Argentinian artist who like came here for residency and really went into this deep research. And I think that is kind of like her gift, that wherever she goes, like regardless if it's in Latin America or looking at archives from different parts of the world, she really finds a way to tell you histories that one did not think that were there or could not even imagine. And um, all this through the very, let's say, traditional technique of figurative drawing. Yeah. And how can such a let's say, yeah, traditional medium still be so political? I think that's how she has managed to bring, yeah, her academic technique into um, academician technique into this field. So, Adriana, without further ado, just go ahead and please share your screen and let us
Yeah.
know
Well,
what you are talking today.
first of all, thank you so much. It's very nice what what you have to say. I will apologize in advance with my English. Sometimes have some I need some words that I don't have in in language, but so I will share my complete screen. And okay, yeah, I'm the substrate of my work. I'm interested in history, but in the tale of history, and it's like history used to generate like these models of meaning that present the reality as a series of truths, no? So what I'm interested in not in the tale, in the general tale, but just looking for this empty space, like maybe history is full of chimeras, empty space, like unconscious information. So I'm looking for that kind of gap in the tale of history. And it's a kind of work of like a custom designer that you just have to break the pattern and then put things together in another way, and maybe that generates another version of history. So another truth, maybe. So that makes sense what you said, Inti, that I'm looking for the dark thing, and sometimes I'm lucky and I found that thing, but sometimes not. But you suggested, Inti, in one of our conversations that maybe we can share with the others, like that kind of maps that suddenly makes you aware that the map is a very interesting tool of knowledge and a very interesting device to maybe to talk in another way over history in this case. And one of the first map when I was very, very young that I met with this one from Joaquin Torres Garcia, that I get aware that really maps are very really political. in the sense that this is another way to see the world, and the Mercator map that we are used to see is really like imperialist. I don't know how to say exactly, but it's the way we see our world where we have inhabit. It's very political, the representation of this geographic stuff. And then this other map that belongs to Lewis Carroll from his one of his poems, and that also for me was another way to see a map that is like a non-map, like an anti-map, because it's the Betsy. It's like a phenomenological map that he tried to talk about the waves and the birds and everything that we are not able to see. And so for me, this was a very important map that is like an anti-map, because we don't have Earth there. Totally, it's just sea. And then also, this for me is a map that it belongs to Borges, that it's a map that could be possible only in the level of language, that it's the heavenly imperious of benevolent knowledge that maybe most of you knows, but he makes a category or well, he says, it is written that animals are divided into A, those that belongs to the emperor, B, embalmed ones, C, those that are trained, D, suckling pigs, E, mermaids, F, fabulous ones, G, stray dogs, H, those that are included in this classification, I, those that tremble as if they were mad, G, J, innumerable ones, K, those that drown with a very fine camel's hair brush, L, etc., M, those that have just broken the flower's vase, and those that at a distance resemble flies. And these three experience of the idea of maps was really makes me realize that the map could be a very important and a very specific and sophisticated tool that I will be able to use. And this is the first map I did, that it was in 2012, that it's the wheel map, that after developing 2 projects that takes me some years. And after that, I really felt lost in my ideas and my existence. And then I realized that I need to do a map to exactly to know where I was. That's the maps are usually used to. And I made this first map. And what I did is to place some writers I was very involved with some projects I did, some personal experience that really moved me, etc. And so I made this first map, and then I find a tool and a device that I will always use till 2012, till now, that I use in parallel of any project I do. It's like an index. I use it like an index of the projects. And then I did this. I would just make like a visual travel through the maps. I won't explain very much because they are, I mean, that all the maps have a very long story, so we don't have the time for that, but it's just visual traveling over them. This map is just now in the exhibition I'm doing and I opened today in the Modern Museum. It's about the Rio de la Plata. So it's a long story, but, and then I found this other kind of map or device that it's a celestial planisphere. And celestial planisphere is a device, but it's like a 3D device that you're able to read the map, to read the sky over this device, and wherever you are in Earth, you are able to read the sky. And so I began to this kind of celestial planispheres that allows me to use the name of the stars and the constellation and place it through concepts and ideas, and then the images around are like allegories of these concepts. Then I began to do these Floovial Maps, and this is the one, the first I did, it was after experience in Colombia, in fact. But it's a map, that talks about all the rivers that I sail from Colombia, the Magdalena, el Río de la Plata, Río Paraná, Vietnam, I'm sorry, I have like a delay in the internet, I think.
It's okay. It looks well.
Okay. Yeah, and then this other river, this piece belongs to Cadiz also collection. That it's a apocrypha river that I did like effect of the coast involved in the slave
In the slave trade.
Exactly, and then all the history in one coast to another, and statistic data, places and people involved in this slave trade, and begins in the Congo River and then in the Rio de la Plata also, but in between is like I put together the coast, the maritime coast, like building a river. And this is a map that, 2 maps I did that one's names, the name is Venus Planisphere, that talk about the possibility of history, like the feminine part of the history that would have happened if the feminist energy would have had some voice that it didn't have, and then this patriarchal official territory, opposite of this map. The sky that we see here and here is exactly the same. It's the first day of the first year of the first month of the history. I mean, from Jerusalem. And the names of the stars I was replaced of about concepts that had to be with patriarchist.
That's wonderful. I think, I mean, you've introduced when with that area within the mapping, it clearly is an experimentation of something that maps. What are wonderful about maps is that they do show you scales that you don't have a dimension of. And so creating another dimension, this celestial dimension, is something that is so incredible. Not only in this case of the last one that you're showing us is using that technique, but also using it to erase it, no? To create the other dimension of the subtext, but now with the filter to try to eliminate the violence of that.
It's like a magic operation.
History. Yeah.
Like a magic operation, yes.
To generate the conversation, I'll bring Cian. So just a brief introduction to Cian, an artist that is now speaking to us from Manila, who has been a great support in reading the historical layers of a very complex society like the Philippines. I mean, help, I say it in a very personal way to try to understand through the work that we've started in Bellas Artes, also to understand the practices of other artists and the politics and the history of the Philippines, and his work, for anyone who has had the chance to see it, like the work of Adriana as well. As I've said, you decipher the work in a way that is completely different to the normal, well, let's say normative behavior of encountering an artwork in a space. No, so there is this really ambivalence of like, is it an actual real map? But clearly, there's a lot of irony, and in your case, more of a punk aesthetics. In other works, some that are connected also to the colonial aspect of cartography through the colonial inheritance of religion, of Catholic imagery that is so connected also to Latin America because of its colonial connections. So, Cian, if you want to go ahead.
Thanks, man. Thanks, Inti. And thanks, Cadix people, for having me. And thank you also, Adriana, for showing your beautiful work. Honored to be here. Yeah, a lot of my work, most of my work, deal with the power relations as represented and reproduced within objects and institutions, such as museums or monuments and maps, especially maps. I guess, and a significant amount of my practice deals with maps, not just the objects, but also the gesture of mapping. Because, like, as Adriana had mentioned a while ago, that maps are like inherently political objects, and historically, we know that they've been used to represent space in relation to ideas of territory or property, or access even, or to account for resources that could be extracted and ultimately exploited. So with that, they used to pretty much, they are used to dominate power structures. And within this history, it's centralized bodies such as states and uh, and corporations have wielded the power of these objects to control both nature and humans. So I'm showing you this image as like a historical reference to anchor my practice on maps. This is the Murillo Velarde map from 1734. I'm showing it to you in wrong orientation, upside down, left side up, and right side up. I guess in a way, as a metaphor for my practice to sort of reorient or disorient supposed functions of maps. But this map, which was done in 1734, is pretty much the first comprehensive map of the Philippines as the Philippines, as a colonial subject to Spain at the time. It was done by a friar, but was engraved by a Filipino. So in the side panels, you see prominent and important ports, and also depictions of the people and some flora and fauna. So like I said, it's a pretty comprehensive map of not just the lands, but also the waters, because the Philippines is an archipelago. And in a way, it somehow also functions as an inventory of resource and territory of the colonial subject. Moving on. As a response to this, to the previous historical reference, some of my work actually reference the general composition of the Murillo Velarde map, such as this one that was done last year for the Berlin Biennale. So this map basically charts out and traces the history and culture of militarism in the Philippines. Do you hear dogs in the background? So
it's a nice element. Go ahead.
So in a way, this work is a subversion to the original reference that somehow relates to this imposed dominant culture of militarism as how we experience it from within the confines of our homes and the intimacy of domestic life onto the social, the outside, and all the way up to the policies that the state puts upon. So from there, I'm also showing you some reference material and some sketches that are behind the work. So it was originally done for a project that is supposed to be somewhat of like a counter ethnographic or cartographic account of like militarism at large in the Philippines, but then lockdown happened and we were forced to somehow interpret or analyze this experience from within our own homes. But at the same time, the lockdown was heavily militarized, as you can see in the upper right image. And looking into zeroing in to the culture of militarism, you kind of see how the Philippines as a neo-colonial or semi-colonial state sort of deals with certain geopolitical conditions and is influenced by other dominant imperialist states as well. And then a lot of my work would arguably be about the representation of marginalized communities, such as peasants and indigenous national minorities here in the Philippines. So within the project of counter mapping or counter cartography, it is like a definite and deliberate agenda to appropriately represent marginalized sectors within their struggles. So with that, would also mean to consult and collaborate with different communities and different people's organizations that are working on the ground directly. So this is a map of the Central Luzon region, mapping out mineral extraction, mining tenements, largest land holdings amidst peasant landlessness, militarization, among other things. So here also is a similar one, mapping out the Cordillera mountain range region in northern Philippines. So a lot of the, most of the textile works have these little patches with QR codes on them. In a way, these QR codes are hyperlinks because when you scan them with your phone, they direct you to related articles or news clips or media clips that are about the different issues that are being represented within each map. Yep. So most of the images in these textile works, and also the text, the language, are somewhat informed and inspired by the images done within workshops that I do with the communities. So these workshops are actually basically like drawing and storytelling workshops within the context of counter mapping or counter cartography. So these workshops I have been doing since 2017, initially as part of my research to make like work, but then it eventually evolved into a separate and autonomous branch of my practice, trying to look into like pedagogical modules and how I can incorporate community-based work into the objects that I make, to support, but also at the same time to as a platform to validate certain information, because other than the research and then the data and information I get from organizations and secondary resources, I also get to validate and also borrow some personal narratives from representatives of different communities that I represent in the textile works as well. So these small workshops happen in different locations, either within communities or within festivals or within protest picket lines, among other venues, and is usually mediated by different alliances or organizations that are working towards social justice and human rights. So here are some examples of the drawings from the workshops. So the one on the left is from Dumagat indigenous communities far east of Manila, and then to the left are from Aitas in Central Luzon region, north of Manila. So basically here in these workshops, I asked them to draw their general idea of their space and then their daily routine, but at the same time, I asked them to map out spaces of fear or of trauma, as well as spaces of comfort. But then usually course, there is this whole dilemma for representation. So it also is very important that to make it clear to the participants what the workshop is for and how their work will be represented afterwards. So we constantly have to put it down on paper and make it very clear that like after this, like if you are willing, like I could take a photograph of your work and then I could present it in a publication or an exhibition or so and so. And then some agree, some don't agree, as long as it's well represented. This is a map of Mindanao showing the southernmost region of the Philippines, mapping out mineral extraction and agribusiness plantations. With works such as these that are informed by like resources, secondary and primary, I also try to incorporate programming or organize a talk or a forum within the exhibition space as a way to supplement the discourse of the object onto the direct audience. So this happened in 2018 as an example. So we had a forum on human rights in Mindanao, law and human rights, martial law and human rights in Mindanao, because Mindanao region, the entire Mindanao region was under martial law at the time. Speakers were from the Lumad communities that are internal refugees. Yeah. Okay. So here we see more images of the workshops, but at the same time, this is my collaborator, Henry, for embroidery. So his work, his name is always mentioned in the work as an immediate collaborator, at least like he is my hands. I guess this is also a nod to the idea that a lot of our ideas we cannot do on our own. And yeah, in a way, like a lot of the work is co-authored, since the stories I represent in my work are not my own personal stories, but are just processed through my own understanding of life and society and politics and power relations. As mentioned a while ago, in terms of representing some of the map drawings, it has also been agreed upon that when map drawings from the workshops are represented in exhibition spaces, their names are also crossed out for safety or ethics, but then it has become somewhat of a I guess like common practice. And also in a way, like exhibitions tend to be could be activated into spaces of knowledge production and information sharing. So I'm just ending this short presentation with this image of somewhat of a map of making a map. But it's like a small image that I shared for a quick zine project last year, but then it has a very basic instructions on why and how to make a counter map for different participants. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Cian. Great. I think both of you showed not only the way that you create these maps, but also the way that you are also finding different ways of presenting them.
Yeah, Cian, it's amazing. Yeah, it's like another dimension of the map, and I'm very like moved what you show us, really, because when you, me, and everybody, we need a map. It's really we need to. It's you need to know sometimes where you are. Like it's a very calm effect that we have when we have this illusion that you have the kind of control. You talk about that, of control, that I think that the map has this very powerful effect that we have this feeling of control of the space, no? And I understand that it's what you do with this, with you as an artist, this operation, and also when you invite others to do this operation of mapping yourself, to control the space, and the effect of that is really very like you calm yourself, it's and I think that is the why the map exists, and I was, and it's like finally the maps are very political when they are designed, like a statement, but then I like very much the medieval way of designing maps, because finally it's about intuition, no? You have an intuition where you're placed in, where your location, no? It's like something to do with intuition. So you have intuition that there's a river and there's a mountain and there's the enemy, or there's the food. It's like operation of intuition. And that's what I found very interesting, the way of mapping of the medieval times, because it was all about intuition. It's they didn't have much knowledge, scientific knowledge, or Google Earth and whatever. And but finally, it's about intuition. I don't know if I'm.
Yeah, totally. I think
I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think other than the practice of looking into or subverting cartography, another similar thing that within our practices is the influence of Christian images, or maybe like from how you mentioned medieval cartography, which is very much loaded with some sort of dominant indoctrinating. If anything, like it rather somehow hides certain truths within their own mysticism and belief. I guess like to point out like a history of cartography that happened within the medieval times, it was actually a lot of undoing geographic developments that Greeks have started in a way, because the world was supposedly centered to God. So in a way, this is very much that is also very much reminiscent to how maps are used now, that instead of bodies or states or corporations showing truthful representations of space, in a way they hide more than they actually show. Yeah, so it's interesting how we can somehow internalize or analyze or sort of reassess the embodied I don't know, like Christianity or cultures of dominance within our own selves and practices.
When you bring the word hiding, Cian, it's definitely the way that both of your practices use this different languages and play with ideas of cartography. There's still like a base of that almost military science. It's between like a military and scientific map of, like, let's say the main base of most of the composition, but then what's inside, what's informing each of the imageries that are there. In your case, Adriana, you work a lot with the material that you use is still very much looking at, let's say, an encyclopedic imagery, or trying to find ways of, for a lack of a better word, to decolonize that encyclopedic knowledge and put and juxtapose information in your maps. And Cian, in the case of your maps, especially ones that are directly coming from that practice of the workshops, precisely because there's a lack of archives, there's a lack of encyclopedia of narratives of what happened to the lands of indigenous people or peasants, given the historical violence that has been perpetuated since colonial times and our neo-colonial corporate form of understanding ownership of land and capital and labor. There is a lack of encyclopedic information. There's a lack, like it exists in oral history, and in the ancestral knowledge, or just clear, non-tangible archival, but very rich oral history that exists still, that you feel it when you, I guess, encounter people in these workshops. They do have an understanding of what happened in that place, but there isn't an image, there isn't a map. And so the juxtaposition of those two work very well. But it works precisely because you operate or use as a base the medium of a very dominant cartography or constellation. But once you get close to each of the works, you understand that is coming from a way of perverting that, so a way of creating some counter-cartography, which is a term that you both have used in your presentations. I wonder is also, how have you felt your work has been received internationally? I'm just curious if you want to share some anecdotes, if you, just to, I guess, in the case of Adriana, there's people, audiences in Latin America might have a direct kind of identification, because they see that mapping has been such an important tool in colonial form of organizing the world and the economy, and creating dominance of empire. But when you show it, let's say when you show it in Paris, or show it outside, I wonder what has that audience, how does the work translate once it's shown there? And I guess also in the case of Cian, since there has been a lot of global exposure of the work, you bring many layered narratives of rural frictions and transhistorical narratives. Maybe you can just say as an anecdote, how does that specificity or regionality translate once it's shown outside of places that have those codes of representation? You know, maybe Adriana, you want to tell us?
I really don't know. I mean, my first contact with the idea of map before, like the formality of the map that I show you in this presentation, was when I was working over the with mules in Córdoba, with basically with the economical producing of mules in Córdoba in times of colonial times. I mean, the 16th till the 18th century. And sorry, I have some, I don't know if you can hear that, but from the outside.
It's okay.
And
we have so many technical. It's okay, don't worry. Go ahead.
You know, like, yeah, life. And I suddenly realized, because I was searching about that and economical news, mules and economical colonial times in Córdoba. And then I found that the roots from the colonial times was just the same of the narco traffic ones in Latin America. And there was a superposing roots of the colonialism, that it was also trafficking, and the narco trafficking around cocaine from Latin America. And so when I realized that the roots were just the same, for me, it was like an impact to realize how close we are contemporary to Europe in a way, you know, like, and so when I began to talk about that in my exhibition of these projects in Europe, I mean that I have the feeling that they get aware that, yeah, we have a relationship, like very old relationship, and we still have that relationship, you know. And for me, that was really a reception of what is a map. I mean, like the idea of map is, it's a representation that allows you to go to one place to another one. And I think that I have the feeling that somebody knows where I live, like an artist, you know? I don't know if you understand what I mean.
Yes, completely. It makes total sense, this connection with, yeah, the roots aspect of the constellations and networks of trade or violence that is interconnected globally is something that, yeah, definitely for people who see your work outside of Latin America start to understand the globality of it. Yeah, and I think the work that is
but
in
it's
CAD
like
is
you like when there is a contemporary link. I mean, because I can talk about the old roots of colonialism, and you know, but when it's a contemporary link of that, that means that there is an understanding, you know, like we are talking about the same.
yeah. And you, Cian?
Yeah, totally. I think this whole idea of translating or relating is very much resonant into like some of our immediate concerns. Know how we know how the format of maps are very much relatable, even if you do not recognize what is represented in the map. You tend to have this um, like feeling of finding yourself within it, or finding something to anchor or to relate to. So I guess to respond to like this question of how um, I think my work is what was that like read in a more global setting as opposed to what I am representing in the work itself, which is like a more local or regional or rural representation. I can't like quantify for sure how it's um, related to, but then I guess like it's always at the back of my head when I try to compose an image, that whenever I'm wanting to articulate a situation or a struggle or an issue that directly affects like rural global south context, it is always within in relation to larger like geopolitical structures of power. For example, how a dam that is affecting a community is um, somewhat of a somewhat of an effect of neoliberal policies put upon a state, wherein foreign debt is involved, and large scale corruption from bureaucrat capitalists. So in a way, this whole dynamic or system is what I'm also this whole narrative or story is what I'm trying to present. So as even if I'm trying to represent a very specific vignette of reality, it can also be relatable to within larger audiences outside of the Philippines or the global South altogether. But at the same time, there's also recognizing the limit of the scope and the limit of what like my work as an individual has. So in terms of like who gets to see an artwork, especially that a lot of my work of late have been shown more abroad than within the Philippines, simply because they're the platform is very much different within an art scene such as the Philippines. So there's this constant search to try to find translations to the research into other formats of visualizations, from textile work to more reproducible format, to contribute to a campaign. There are many other ways on how we can expand or extend our practice as well. So I guess this is all in relation to how I think my work is, yeah, like is accessed by different audience.
What you just said, Cian, about the immediate recognizable language of maps is, yeah, definitely in both of your works. As I've mentioned, I do feel that the behaviorally, no, when people have to be in front of your piece, immediately the mind goes somewhere else than as you would experience an artwork in general. Precisely because, yeah, you feel some kind of anthropocentric relationship of like let's see the world from this place, or I'm looking at a place, yeah? And so you have the projection of a site and you try to understand what is that reality that is being created. And going back to the beautiful Borges text that Adriana brought is precisely that, no? That there are different ways of organizing the world, there are different ways of creating a new episteme of thinking how we represent the world. So we'll open to the questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cian and Adriana, for your presentation. I was very curious, and also thinking back, I think you started touching upon it, Cian, too, thinking about your practice and your work in the way that it shifts perceptions and like brings perspectives that are maybe not also heard or hasn't been like historicized or like talked about through history. I was curious also about your take more looking at digital maps, or like how maps are done today as like a social, like a political tools as well. And how you're kind of maybe, I don't know if you're really integrated in your work, but I'm sure it's also on your mind when you're thinking about maps. So I was curious to hear about the shift maybe also in perceptions for maps today. Thank you.
Oh, the question was to me, right?
To both of you, I guess.
Oh, okay. Adriana, would you like to go first?
No, you, please.
Okay. At the moment, I guess I'm more inclined to somehow make work that is relatively static. In a way, I find static representations to be somewhat of a like historicizing or like monumentalizing kind of gesture in a way that it's set. And it is just because of that. Also recognizing that at some point, I mean, like maps not only represent space, but they also represent time and specific kinds of historical contexts. But I guess in the essence of trying to find efficacy, if I want to like further activate the format or practice of working with maps, and there is the technology that provides it, it will call for further collaborations because that is within my reach. With the same reason as that I don't do embroidery myself. That I have a collaborator that embroiders. So I think there isn't any limit really to how we can translate our work into different frames or formats or scopes, but it's pretty much how we find it within our communities to somehow collaborate and work together. So yeah, I'm definitely open into making interactive digital or web-based format work.
Yeah, for me, it's like map is like a way of seeing the world. I mean, like anything I represent, I mean, like a drawing or whatever, I have the feeling that I'm mapping because I think it's like a very important and very simple tool for everybody. I mean, to have the knowledge of be settled or be located. It's a tool of location, and I mean in amplified sense of the word located in the world. I mean in economical situation, social situation, family situation, professional situation. It's yeah, the map is not the territory, we know that. It's like a possibility of a feeling of where are you placed in relation to, no? It's like an idea of proportion, like I'm not sure I'm very clear with language, but it's like a relation to, okay. No? The map, you place you in a territory with different dimensions, distance, time, distant time, and so I have the feeling that the only way I'm able to read everything is through the idea of a map, like an amplified idea of the map. And sometimes you need to draw in that. Sometimes you need to talk about that. That, for example, this Borges poem, no, that it was just words, and he was drawing a map. I mean, like I think it's we need to. It is very useful in this moment for us, even if this pandemic situation and this crisis of ecological crisis, that to have the idea of space. I mean, like of the other. So my territory is here, and then the river is there, and the bus station is there, and I don't know. I mean, like it's like a very, very wide and very useful. I think that it's not. I understand why many artists and many people are interested in like be very conscious about the space, because it means like very conscious about Earth and no, like where are the things, where are the other, where are the plants, where are the animals? We are in a crisis, in the middle of crisis of that. And I think in map, like a wide concept is like a way of feeling the earth, the place, our life, and yeah.
I was thinking that the development of Western cartography was kind of given a lot because of charting of colonial territories, no? It developed a lot as an exercise of power, as you both have stressed. And I was thinking how in your work in different ways and through different channels, you are kind of also making subjectivities emerge in the representation of a space in these ways that are kind of counteracting the power of, let's say, more military or colonial maps. And in the case of Cian, I think with the maps you have produced in dialogue or from the dialogue with communities in the Philippines that are affected by very specific ways of extractivism, then this collective subjectivity emerges in your work. And in the case of Adriana as well, with the research on these historical connections or bringing personal narratives or references to the maps. Also, there is this, let's say, undoing of the power exercise that maps normally represent. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the materiality of the map. I know you have talked a little bit about it, but I'm interested in how Of course, on screen you can't see that well, but Cian's work has a lot of little elements hanging and a lot of little things that are happening apart from the image that you see when you're kind of removed. And in the case of Adriana as well, there are all these little details and in the manufacture of the work itself. So I was maybe wondering if you could talk about the sort of methodology of work in terms of how you make these images appear.
Cian. Well,
Okay.
I will.
Should I start?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. With the textile works that I have been sort of loosely working on for the past couple of years. Basically, they're also referenced from medieval feudal tapestries that are, in a way, nomadic murals that are moved from space to space with representations of landscapes and maps of property and territory. Hence, they are feudal. And to subvert this material and visual culture of feudalism, given the consideration of my positionality as anti-feudal, particularly within solidarities of peasant struggle, with the peasant struggle here in the Philippines, hence the use of textile maps, I suppose. But yeah, I guess that's a very basic premise of why initially. At the same time, it also carries a very practical aspect in a way that since they are textile, it's very easy to move around and show around and smuggle in and out of the country without having to declare it as art. You can say it's a curtain or a rug or a carpet or something. So in a way, it serves the function of being nomadic, and at the same time being its tactility and materiality has a very intimate aura that comes along with it. Also, I guess the idea of textile work being somehow gendered is also a nod to my practice of somehow queering the map, queering representations of space in a sense that it sort of subverts the heteronormativity of the cartographic practice. So I guess to go in a little bit into detail with the details, a lot of the little trinkets that are found hanging are either like small amulets or fabricated amulets or small objects like keychains and other souvenir stuff that I use as pins or as markers within the map. So for the objects that I fabricate myself, they basically are done with are made with like a brass press, like those little pins that you put on your collar or something. So the drawings that are somehow influenced by imagery from the drawing workshops are translated and processed into my own visual practice. I make drawings out of them, and then they either come out in these little fabricated pins or amulets or embroidery patches that are incorporated into the work. So it's a lot of I guess layers of materiality and tactility within how images are translated into different scales and formats. So I guess it's very playful, and at the same time it's it leaves a lot of space, or it tends to have the audience want to sort of immerse with the work. But that's as far as like the work goes. I think how the multiple subjective narratives are represented is another story within the layers of image making. So
Very interesting. Yeah, in my case, the drawing, the act of drawing for me is like a operation of like bring it back. I don't know how to say well in English, but to get alive again, like images from archives. And so I drawing by myself all the images, I know, and I feel that I'm taking these images back to a new discussion, you know, like actualizing that image of archives, like all my image. If I drawing, in the process of drawing the images, I understand the images. I have like a personal process of understanding what the images are. And on the other hand, like a post operation is like I feel that I get that images to life again in like a new arena, no? Like in contemporary arena, just to see that images again and in a new context, historical context, and related to other images again. That's the way I made my maps.
Joey, sorry, just before to hear your question and maybe to connect Maurice and Catalina's inquiry, it's definitely precisely because of that materiality of both of your works and that, let's say, softness, if you'd like, of the embroidery and of the sketch aesthetics of the figurative imagery, both fauna, flora, or people. It's completely contrary to the digital world in that sense, no?
Yeah.
Because so I think that people relate to the work in, or they're arrested by both of your works because we are so desensitized of such materiality from our screen reality that this non-shininess, non-digital imagery actually de-accelerates us and tells us it's kind of like a portal towards the complexities of the histories that you're bringing. And at the same time, in the case of Adriana's body of work where constellations appear, they are themselves digital in the sense of how algorithms and networks operate, no? Like we have an idea of interconnectivity of how the digital world exists, but it's all based on those interconnections of the rhizomatic or constellation imagery that it appears as an image. And now that I see it, since you're presenting it, also an artist that maybe it's connected to audiences in San Francisco is Martin Wong, when he did his constellations. I'll show you later, Adriana, if you're and Cian, if you're not familiar with this artist from the late 80s, early 90s, also creating this constellations of meaning and literally painting constellations. It does bring you to another dimension, but again, through a very non-digital medium such as trace, drawing, painting. Joey, if we are here with you, do you want to ask your question? I think you wanted to ask something.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing your work today that shows us how mapping and constellation can propose alternate perceptual psychological states that are very much embedded in very specific geopolitical and spatial relationships, and at the same time push against dominant ideologies towards agency and subjectivity, but also towards the unknown and maybe the possibility of mapping. There's a kind of the multiplicity and the abundance of mapping suggests that it's an impossible task. I was going to ask you about your chosen mediums and the presence of the human hand, but I think you really covered those topics in the previous answers. So really just comments and thinking about the pencil drawing as a medium for Adriana and how it can be seen as a kind of witnessing, a kind of subjective mark making, but also possible to be erased. So suggestive of erasure, and that's tethered to multiple geographical terrains and time. And Cian with the drawings and tapestry, the workshops that are always pointing to the multiple, the collaborative, the various versions of the same, the various ways in which we experience our realities, and how that sense of intimacy, the quotidian and sensorial relationships are being brought into the kind of communal space. So I just want to say thank you for sharing, and into your comment about kind of artworks as a way to stop time, both maybe in the meticulous and detailed of tapestry and the drawing that can really help us like slow down. I think it's another kind of counter mechanism, another way of pushing against the time that it's always moving in certain directions, against policies and politics and violence. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Joy.
Good.
Thank you.
I think
yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Adriana, Cian, Inti, and everybody at Caddis, Erin also in the background doing the tech. It's been really a pleasure, and I hope we'll continue these conversations also offline for anyone who wants to also continue to follow this Ketchup Session. You can sign up for a newsletter or looking at our website for these monthly updates. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.